Good news, everyone! We're at our 50th episode of the Crash Chords Podcast.
That's right.
What?
50? That's a big number.
Yeah,
It's not that big.
This is our last podcast before we hit our 1
On
year.
what scale?
The human mind can easily comprehend between 100 and 1,000. Like, that's our limit.
But probably not in the mind of who's saying, that's a big number. That person.
Who is that
So
guy?
you.
Probably.
Does he have a
It's
name?
Steve.
Who is that
His name
guy?
is Steve.
No, I don't know who that was.
It's Steve.
That was some loafer.
That sounds like someone named Rupert.
No, it was just a loafer
No,
who crept
first
in
of
here
all-
and started speaking.
Rupert, that's racist. Or
What?
bigoted towards Ruperts out there.
So yes, we're at
guy in
the
your
last
club.
episode of our first year. We hit
Season 1 finale.
sort of yes.
I'm
We're
gonna
actually
make
going to.
I'm going to make it thick.
Shut up, John.
Nope.
We're doing something special this week. We're going to just have a topic. No album review this week. We're going to get into a new rotation of album reviews, starting with Steve next week.
Pure discussion today.
But
So if
first,
you like that part of the podcast, you'll enjoy this one.
So before we get on to the main discussion, though, for the first time in a while, I actually started listening to a new band I haven't heard before. Tegan and Sarah, a sister lesbian duo.
They're not lesbians with each other.
They're sisters. That's why I said sister lesbian duo.
You could have just said sisters. Their sexual orientation doesn't come into play.
Actually, it does, because they do a lot of songs that reference that, as far as I can tell.
Welcome to your segue.
I don't own a segment.
I teed it up right there from... They are...
As I pull my collar,
Indie?
which you can't see.
God, stop describing that.
You don't have a collar. It's a t-shirt. A collar
This
is
a
something
collar.
that actually
No, it's
comes
called-
out of the
Never
shirt.
mind.
He has a chain. It has a key on it. What's
does.
that for? The key to...
Do you really want to get into this?
It's some girly
No,
thing.
Probably not.
It's a girly
Sounds
thing.
really lame. I don't know.
Yes, because love is lame.
Like I said, it's girly.
There you go.
Yep.
Anyway,
We have
so
to belittle you. It's-
Man has a girlfriend.
yeah, I do. How do you feel about that?
Wasn't it a lot
I
simpler?
don't know. I'm okay with it.
Just out of curiosity, like from a man's perspective, wasn't it simpler when girls just had cooties?
It was a lot simpler. You just, like, that was it.
Yeah.
That was it. You know. But, yeah.
So the song by Tegan and Sarah that I've been listening to a lot and has gotten stuck in my head is a song called Closer from their new record, which came out last year.
What type of music do they make?
It's indie, but I mean, this song was actually kind of more dancey, kind of a more pop track. It was a lot of fun. It was a catchy song.
So it's pop indie in this song.
Yes.
Okay.
I haven't listened to a lot of their other stuff. Sarah's played me... I mean, some of their stuff leans more towards folk that Sarah's played for me. So, I mean, I haven't listened to their whole discography yet, but I'm going to definitely at least get my hands on the new album and check that out first. And then probably go back from there. I think they have 3 records, maybe? Question mark. Besides that, I've been kind of on a dance kick. I made a dance mix on Spotify. I put a couple of the new tracks from Daft Punk on there. Threw a couple songs from Macklemore on
You
there.
made a dance mix?
Yeah.
Wow.
Something upbeat.
I've never made a dance mix before. Not that I don't enjoy it, but
I did it because...
I've never thought to do it.
I did it because... I mean, Spotify is actually a wonderful tool if you have the paid version on your phone, because you can create playlists on the computer, download them to your phone on a Wi-Fi so it doesn't cost data, and then just play it from your phone and you don't have to stream it. And I don't know, I wanted something upbeat to listen to. You know what it was? The first nice day we had last week where it was just cool enough that you didn't need the AC and you could just have the windows down. I wanted a mix that I could blast that was kind of upbeat while driving with the windows rolled down.
You know what is my equivalent with that? The Kings of Diggin' compilation compiled by
I remember you told me about
DJ
it.
Morrow
Yeah.
and Connor Namir. Those great DJs. They're record surfers. They go find things in basements
Right.
that haven't been turned in yet. And most of it was awesome funk from like the late 70s.
You played it for me, I remember.
It is my favorite, most upbeat dancing soundtrack, probably.
My favorite, playing loud on television. Bless you.
I stepped away from the microphone to try and sneeze,
totally.
not in your ears.
Playing loud on radio with the windows rolled down and the sunroof open is got to be Kurt Wagner's compilation album. All of his greatest hits.
Huh.
Ride of the Valkyries is easily the greatest song to drive to of all time.
I mean, I'm not opposing, but of all the things, this is when you whip out the classical?
I think John's just being arbitrary for
No,
arbitrary
that's
sake.
not true. I love listening to classical when driving because classical is a great background music when driving.
Ah.
True.
And when you're listening to Ride of the
Did you say
Valkyries...
Kurt Wagner?
Yeah. No, it's not Kurt.
No, it's
I think
That's
you
a
want
super
to
villain.
say Kurt Vonnegut.
No.
It's Richard Wagner.
yeah.
Richard Wagner.
I thought it was
Wagner.
Wagner. It's Wagner.
It is Wagner.
Well, in German, it's
Richard
Wagner.
Wagner.
And he's
Kurt
German.
Wagner, I believe, is Nightcrawler?
Kurt Wagner, yes, it's actually Nightcrawler's real name.
Wow, this
Yes.
is just a fail session.
Pretty much.
It started with Matt.
That's totally the name of, if we ever put out a book, the three of us, like as a Crash Chords book, it'll be called The Fail Sessions. I like that.
And under
That's a
sign-
great idea,
And at the bottom, we would have ellipsis, sure.
Yes.
Ugh.
I like it.
For all those times we berate each other for being smarter than each other.
I'm smarter than both of you put together
Yeah, right.
in certain aspects.
I would love to see you prove that.
I
I
understand-
wouldn't love to see him
Dude,
do
I
that.
understand mathematical concepts, and I'm explaining to you them.
And
them
none
to you
of that
every
is
week.
helpful here.
No, but I explain stuff like that to you every
Well, he
week.
didn't say smarter at music, he
I
just
said
said
specific
smarter at
areas.
Specific areas. All right,
Physics
I'll buy
and math, yes. I rock your worlds. Sometimes literally, with my physics.
that. I can rival you, though. In concept.
Okay.
Is this a cricket time? Really? You're going to cricket me for that?
Yep.
Well, technically you'd be cricketing you if you did that, but I think we're overdoing it now. Although it's a running gag, and I love running
I'm
gags.
going to have to now.
I love running gags. Anyway, so our giant topic that we've actually been talking about for weeks, kind of off the air, is we kind of wanted to have a music versus art or music as art conversation, and we've dabbled in it in the past, but it's kind of like
Often we've dabbled in the
it's
past.
a huge topic, and so John has kind of a
My
specific
favorite
point.
topic.
John has a specific point that he kind of wanted to start with, and then we'll see where it goes from there. We don't really have we have an outline.
We're
but-
starting. Here's this. Here's the concept. I proposed this several weeks ago, and the idea is music allowed to be more deviant and disassociative in its style than other forms of art? Are people, specifically the critical element, more accepting of difference in music than other art forms? Are experimentations more welcome in music? That was the real core concept of what I was going for.
And I will start myself by saying I disagree. Completely.
I'm kind of in the middle somewhere now.
Matt was all like, I thought this argument was just going to be Jones wrong, and then I started pulling out points before we started doing this. I believe that music as a whole, maybe not in every aspect, but as a whole, it definitely leans towards being allowed to be deviant.
I might have said that years in the past, maybe, but I feel like now in the modern era, it's less so, and that other art forms are given a lot more leeway as well.
It's just the opposite as well. I mean, music itself was beholden to certain standards.
Look at the sonata. If you made a sonata, you had a formula to make music.
But even that you're looking at like 120 years ago here. Like, even within the boundaries of the 20th century, even the early 20th century, they were doing pretty crazy things with that form.
I know.
Even if you step outside of that form, I think more forms themselves were being created around that time. So I'd say even as of the early 20th century, music was starting to get pretty... Wow, this is proving your point, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Dang, how did you do that, man?
But also, to John's point
I used
also,
math.
and it's kind of like, I feel like at this modern age, music has never been better, and also,
Worse.
never been worse at the same time.
Uh,
it's never been this good or this bad. It's
And
so far on both
I
ways.
will agree with that, because
Yeah.
some of the bad music out today probably would never have even gained
Any
traction
momentum.
in 100 years
But
ago.
also, some of the really awesome stuff would have been completely overlooked because it wasn't sellable back then as well.
No, it also...
Like in the 80s.
Some of the really awesome stuff would not have been makeable.
Yes.
Some of the really awesome things are so digitalized that you couldn't have made it, in the 50s.
It's not even a Badger.
Badger?
It's,
Is that like a badger?
Measure,
Mushroom.
Mushroom. It's flip.
Flip.
He said
he's
badger
doing a thing with words.
instead of
and letters.
badger.
He's doing a thing.
I got it.
That's why I put B in
I
front
got
of
it.
It's mushroom
He's doing a thing.
Yeah, he's always doing a thing.
with a B.
In any case, it's not a matter of digitization. It's a matter of instruments as well. It's a matter of just electrification. We did start to say this last week. The birth of rock and roll. That's a whole new area of sound, and it's also more focused around youth and having fun and virility around that time, as opposed to the more straight-laced kind of music you might get in the classical era.
I mean, but also yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But also kind of bringing it back to art, which is where the conversation is going, although it seems like we're going to agree with John a lot quicker than we intended to.
Well, we're going to get on other forms of art.
But when it comes to art, specifically just using the term art, my problem with creating music as an art form versus is that sometimes they ignore the musicality to make it art. The best example that we always go back to is Flying Lotus. Some of those songs felt like pieces of art, but they were terrible to listen to. And does that mean that it shouldn't exist because it's one way and not the other? Or does it just mean that personal tastes apply at that point? I personally, I'll put it on me first. I personally can't stand music that's just art for art's sake, because I need to be able to actually enjoy and get something from it too.
I agree with that.
And we're going to go back.
The best kind is the kind that offers both.
Well, we're going to discuss art first and foremost. This is going to be the basis of our definition of art. Art is something created to evoke emotions. That's our foundation. That's how we define art.
Or evoke an idea.
I want to amend that. It's something observed that invokes emotion, because there are plenty of pieces of art that aren't necessarily created. Like when we talked about nature's beauty and how some of that can be considered artwork. I mean, I guess it's still created.
Well, let's go back to, considering we were talking about techno last week, a lot of techno is used for dance halls these days. At that point, you're not talking about evoking emotion, really. You're talking about just music you can dance to. That's functional. Yes, you might feel something, but it's almost abstract. The more important thing than you sitting in a chair and focusing and feeling emotionally involved or invested, more important than that is the fact that you're on the dance floor and you can actually move to it.
But then the things
for that genre.
But then the things you're doing on the dance floor itself could be considered art, because that's a performance that might make someone feel something.
That's another thing, though. That's a separate thing, and it is kind of tethered to the music end.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It's
but
kind of
the
like
music
connected.
end doesn't require that there's a great dance being done to it.
No.
But dance music that truly works in getting people dancing is making them emotionally receptive to moving, to bouncing, to feeling that fun, free nature associated with a dance hall, a dance club.
Fair enough, but that's a very rigid kind of emotion.
It's a specific emotion.
Actually, it's not emotion, it's just motion.
When I dance, if I dance in the privacy of my own home when nobody's looking, because I'm a terrible dancer.
He dances with himself. Oh.
Yes. When I groove, it's because I'm feeling upbeat. It's because I'm feeling fun, and I'm actually shaking back and forth to accent my point. It's because I'm feeling something and want to express it.
Certain kinds of dance, yes, but there's others that I think is just... I don't think it requires that emotional investment. I think it's more of just a tool to get people going in a hall.
Yeah, well,
but it's evoking. That's
no,
what I'm saying.
but
we're splitting hairs at this point, but it's evoking emotions.
Because even if you're just having fun, that's still enjoyment is an emotion.
Fair enough.
It's an emotional state.
But I still consider that a functional form of art. The kind that has to fulfill a certain thing.
But it can be both.
If it's not catchy, then it doesn't fulfill it. And therefore it's not good dance music.
Here's my first argument to why I feel music is wider in the critical scape. Music is both functional and artistic, and can exist simultaneously, and other forms of artwork don't have that adaptability to the same extent that music does.
Incorrect.
That's exactly where I would disagree with you.
Yeah. We just had a conversation off the air about how comedy is both functional and artistic.
I'm saying music can go the full gauntlet. It can be pure functional, it can be pure art, It can be both simultaneously. And other forms of art lean towards one or the other and cannot hit the same extremes music can.
I still gotta disagree. I think even visual art can cross both lines.
Well, we'll get into some specifics. Like, architecture and food are two very functional forms of artwork.
Yes, you're either going to eat it or you're not, and it's either going to fill you or it's not.
And it's either going to make you sick or not. I mean, it has to fit this criteria. Architecture has to be sound, has to be safe.
It has to be practical. Like, there's engineering things that go into account.
Exactly. There's always a practicality element.
It could be a beautiful building, but if it's going to fall down in a week, it's not very good.
And this applies architectural as a large three-dimensional piece of art. Still has to be able to withstand, because of the size that architectural is associated with, it has to stand up to the rigors of existing. Food has to stand up to the rigors of edibility.
Okay.
You cannot remove the functional part of these forms of art.
True. But then again, even when it comes to food, I'd say if we're just talking about edibility, there's a lot of, like, food by definition is that which is edible. Past that point, you're still talking about a whole range of subjectivity.
And personal taste.
And personal taste. A lot of people don't like green beans. Other people think that if you cook green beans the right way, they can be delectable aside. There's any number of examples I could give when it comes to food. You're Italian. You should know these examples.
Yes, I do know.
But also, like, I feel like there are other forms that can exist both independent and merge perfectly. I mean, let's take performance art. Performance art has a function to entertain. All performances
No, I mean...
have a function.
I mean a function outside of its existence as art. When we're talking about a function of art, we're saying food has an existence outside of just looking pretty and tasting delicious. It's supposed to fulfill other roles. There are criteria for forms of art that need to be fulfilled. Video games.
But if it's not edible at that point...
It's no longer food.
And it's not even art at that point.
Exactly. You can make food that is unedible.
Well, yeah, any advertising you see with food in it is completely unedible. Because they glue it, they rearrange it, they cut it up.
Artistically looks great. Visually looks great. Looks delicious.
But it's inedible.
All right, but we're just looking at one. Edible is a very base term of functionality. Well, let's look at just one other element here. How about low-calorie stuff? How about vegetarian stuff? A lot of people have spent a lot of energy working on types of cuisines that fill you up while not, filling you up, while not making you unhealthy and putting you at risk for a heart attack as a result. People spend money on this stuff, and I think they are considered works of art. I'm not coming from a vegetarian perspective, but I know a lot of people who would really swear by some of these things. At that point, that is a functional usage as well as an art form. Make it delicious, but also make it healthy.
They started with a functional criteria and then fulfilled it in an artistic way.
Yes, but that's a crossover. I feel like that disproves you in that point.
I'm saying you cannot remove the functional
He's saying
aspect
music
from these forms of art. Music does not have to have any functional aspect to it. Music can be a series of tones with no bearing, no desire to actually do anything, no desire to fulfill any criteria. Architectural pieces have things they must do. Video games, another form of art.
Let me just
has
interrupt.
Things to do.
Let me interrupt with the prime example here. I think visual art is the ultimate rival in this regard.
Well,
I think visual art can be a splotch, literally, and I've seen this.
And have zero function and can be completely artistic.
That's not functional.
However, also sculptures can. There are sculpted coat racks that look like these great, beautiful sculptures that serve a function to hang your coats, but are still artistic and can also just exist as art.
We live in New York City. This is hipster central. A lot of people are into these little esoteric things.
That's where I'm going to say it's the flip side. two-dimensional and three-dimensional art, and we're going to the basic over genres of two-dimensional art are really, in my opinion, photography and canvas medium. Like, those are the two main differences. Canvas medium is creating something completely separate from imagination or from escape, or just, paint thrown against a wall, while photography is the photographing of existence.
Photography used to be a lot more functional, but it's developed into a very complex art form.
But we're just going to divide it that way. And three-dimensional art, for all of the interpretiveness, from bronze sculptures of famous people to a cube that is just matte steel gray and it's supposed to evoke something. Maybe you know what it is, maybe you don't, but truly interpretive pieces. All three-dimensional art is designed around viewing it from every angle.
All right.
In that case, in the case of 2- and 3-dimensional art, can you truly say you take the artistic nature out of it and make it purely functional? Because you can do so with music.
Yes.
Name something.
On a dime.
Name something artistic
Yes.
that has the art taken out of it.
What do you mean that doesn't feel like... What do you mean art
Something
taken out?
creative of a 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional artistic medium
That doesn't feel artistic.
that has no art in it, that is a pure functional piece.
What does that mean, has no art in it?
That is creative, not artistic. Because I can think of pieces...
Where's your music example?
We've never been so abstract so early
Where's
in the
your
podcast.
music example?
There is this scientific... I can't remember what college is doing this. They're doing experimentation on how tones affect people's ability, and they're done in musical form, but they are not even close to being really artistic music. It's scientific music. And you were talking the other day...
You're talking about music therapy.
Thank you.
But
And you were talking the other day about the musical therapy that's making people see colors, and what was that again?
oh, synesthesia.
Exactly. There are forms of what we would actually consider music that are almost pure scientific in nature.
I feel you're making a comparison closely between visual art and music. I feel like, again, that proves our point.
What?
If that comparison between, going back to your previous example of the cube, if you take the art out of art and it reduces itself to a functional object, if you're making a comparison there between that 3D object and with music, to the therapeutic side, to the enjoyment side, I feel that's just more of a direct comparison between music and visual art there. I don't see the distinction in subjectivity that is more weighted on music, as was your previous claim.
If you take a handcrafted chair that's created as a chair, it's not art. It's a chair. But it's still hand sculpted, so it is a sculpture that just serves a function with no art.
Beautiful chair.
And that's a point I was trying to lead you to. I was trying to get you guys to go for that, and I just couldn't put it in words. That's an excellent point. Because
He likes to have us believe that he's been steering us for the past
the whole
10
time.
minutes.
No, I was trying to get you to come up with the idea that a cube can just be used as a bookmark, regardless of how it looks and everything like that. It was designed, it was created.
Bookmark.
Not a bookmark,
A paperweight.
or a stand, a bookend, something like that.
All right.
You can use it as just a piece to hold something, to do something. It was creative, it was created, but it's not art, it's pure functionality.
Yes.
That's really the biggest argument I see against my thing. But I will say, there's so many forms of art that we consider that are functional first, or functional second, but are intrinsically functional. That music doesn't have to be, and that's why I see those forms of art specifically don't have the adaptability that music has.
I still see. I see us walking along a thin line here.
Yeah, it's not as separate as you're saying it is, I feel.
Just as you said just a little earlier, there's many areas of music. One area of music is the therapeutic. Yes, that may have less desirability to our ears, but it probably has some powerful therapeutic qualities to it, tones and such. But then there's the other kind that is purely for immersion and emotional investment.
That's
Again,
my point.
If that's the case, that's just I see a direct comparison between that and visual
It's
art.
Then that's where I don't see it. I don't see.
You're citing a very specific
level.
reference. A very specific reference to scientific use of music. We're citing a very specific reference to chairs as a functional hand sculpture that's just function.
No, I'm not making the comparison to 2- and 3-dimensional art.
You're making it to other arts?
I'm going to get to why I would. I'm going to get to 2- and 3-dimensional with a separate argument.
All right, so
with a completely separate one.
What's your segue?
No. I want to finish this one, but I want you guys to concede my point.
What?
That functional art, that is the basis of what we talked about of video games, which I try to get into. You keep glossing over.
We'll get there.
Of video games, of food, of architecture, and the ilk that's associated with them, must remain functional and cannot go true artistic. Cannot go full artistic. Has to remain functional.
I don't see that.
In fact, in video games, I can reference a very specific point.
Okay.
There was a PC game made last year. Of course, I can't remember the name of it. But it's a wash of colors, and you control a dot. There's no story. There's no goal. There's no puzzle. You just move this dot through a space, and things change. And there's no end goal. But it's still a game. And you're still doing something.
And I'm going to bring a separate point. What is the object? What is the point? What is the functional point of an Andy Warhol piece?
You keep going. We're
He's
not
not talking about
that.
art.
Get off those topics.
You just
No.
literally,
No, we're
you
not
just
talking
said-
about
He
that.
just brought up...
And I just said that, yes, you guys actually made a good point against it.
For that.
But we're not talking about that. You're on this. You're not even listening to what I'm saying at this point.
I'm listening.
No, you're
No,
not.
John just said...
I'm not
he's
talking about 2- and 3-dimensional art.
He's talking
I'm going
about...
to get to that in a few minutes.
All right.
Okay.
I'm waiting on that.
Yeah,
Because I still feel like
I'm
you made that
talking
claim.
about something
He's
else.
moved off it back to architecture, food, video games. That music is more forgiving than those. The secondary levels of art, quote unquote.
No,
Okay,
I'm talking...
then these areas of art, which I think all of us are going to end up conceding that they're functional, aren't we?
No, but I'm saying...
Video games are certainly functional.
Yes, they're... And
He's saying video games can't exist without function.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
That's what he was saying.
And
He's
food
saying,
can't exist without function.
and buildings
And
can't
buildings
exist
can't
without
exist
function.
without function.
That's the point he was trying to make.
Yes.
He was going back to that. We made the art
I'm trying
point
to make that
prematurely.
point.
You know,
We got on the
even
topic
this,
of...
I might challenge you just a little bit.
How?
We just started to we didn't really let this conversation evolve, but when we were talking about food before, I started to stress that if your base function is edibility, then how is that function any more abstract than music's auditory? It either creates sound or it doesn't. It either goes down your belly or it doesn't.
No. Edibility
itself-
is not the thing that will make food art. It's the visual aspect of food, the olfactory aspect of food, and the palpability. Palpability is a huge part of food. If food is not palpable, it's not going to be considered art. It'll look great. It'll smell great. But if you cannot get it down your throat because it tastes bad, you will not consider it good
But I
food.
thought we were just talking about without function, not with function. John's talking about music can exist without function.
That's
and
what I'm
just be
saying.
sound. Food cannot exist without function.
That's my
Then it's
point
not food.
that I keep reiterating.
But I'm making that comparison, bringing it back to music, and saying that function is no less than what the function that music has, which is, we're kind of overlooking this baseline here, simply be audible, create sound. I feel like palpability is very correlated to that.
Okay.
There's either a sound that you can hear, or you can either eat it. That those two are right along the same line.
Except I could put sand in my mouth, chew, and swallow.
And it's not food.
That would be the same level of it makes sound, so it can be considered music. It's audible, so it's music. I would if
so you've in fact made food more broad. You can eat anything. You can eat a block of steel.
No. I'm saying, just because it's audible, that's not the same comparison as palpable. Because palpable is much more specific. Edible is much more specific than the ability to put it in your mouth. The ability to put it in your mouth, I would consider the same level.
In other words,
as audible.
There's a constriction there. There's a constriction between what you can swallow and what you can't.
No.
And there's a constriction between what you can hear and what you can't.
Food you can touch. That would be the equivalent of saying sound you can hear, which is what the claim you're making.
Yeah.
Food you can touch is just saying it is a real, tangible object. Sound you can hear is just saying it's a real, tangible vibration.
Which is why, realistically speaking, I'm saying that we have a limit of palpability. But that is still a limit. There's going to be a point where it's no longer palpable. There's going to be a point where you can no longer hear it.
You're making my point.
No,
I'm making my point.
No, that was my point.
No, you're making... There is a level of palpability.
But you said initially, if you take out the function, the art ceases. And this is where I say that with music, as well, if you take out the function, the art ceases.
If you take out the vibration of sound waves, yes... There is no music because the definition of music
or if the vibration
is
of sound
vibrating
waves
of sound
are beneath what you can hear it.
So what you're saying okay, I hate to do this on air. That is a stupid argument.
That is not a stupid argument.
Because what you're saying is...
Because we're talking about the graspable at this point.
Then you're saying that if food is intangible, it's not food. Duh! Yes! That is much broader a term, an idea, than food is palpable or not.
I'm going to humor you for a while, alright? Continue with your train of thought.
I just don't get it. I don't understand his argument.
I'm saying that your definition of functionality itself is subjective.
No, here's what I think you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
If music doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. And comparing it as the same sort of quantified logical sentence as, if you can't eat it, you can't eat it. That's much more defined in the core of food. That's a much more specific area. The whole, if you can't hear it, it doesn't exist, is equivalent of saying, if you can't touch it, it doesn't exist.
If you can't taste it, perhaps.
There's plenty of people who can't actually taste.
Well, then the art is lost on them, unfortunately, in the same way it would be on, the music would be on the deaf.
Exactly. But even
so
then...
that's kind of a misnomer.
Even then, food can be visually...
It does operate on another level because of the visual. I'll agree with that, and smell as well.
And that comes to...
That I'll concede to.
This is my next point. And this is 2 of 3. My next point is... Music is one of the few forms of art that relies on one stimulant to exist. And that is the actual production of the music. That is the actual sound waves. Other forms of art rely on multiple factors in order to exist.
Oh, I'd love to see how you're going to prove this. I mean, other forms of art in terms of, like, movies and things, but we're talking about the basic forms of art.
Sculpture?
How about just... Let's go back to drawings here. Let's go back to drawings and paintings. You're not really supposed to touch them. So if you're going to say that you can, that's kind of a
that's bunk.
Method. Yeah.
That's bunk.
Okay. But also in two-dimensional, a major aspect in the actual composition of paintings is the thickness and layering of the materials on the canvas.
That itself is still visual. That is depth perception.
But you can change the experience of a painting just by changing the style of lighting.
Still visual. Lighting is visual.
But you're changing the definition.
But it's still just
that's
one
all
thing.
visual,
right.
And you said one sense.
Yeah.
No, and outside these outside forces. I was trying to go to 3-dimensional because that's where I wanted to refute 3-dimensional art.
But what?
I'm going step by step. This refutes
Right.
this group, this refutes this group, this refutes this group.
Well, I'm refuting that group. All right, go on.
But in two-dimensional, like, you can change it. And here's another aspect. In visual art, especially when you get into the larger pieces, it's the forest versus trees aspect of artwork. You can only either take in the piece as a whole or focus on the detail work.
Okay, I would say that itself is directly comparable to music.
You can both take in the...
We do it all the time
Yes.
on the podcast.
Yes, you can...
In music, I feel like it's much easier to pick out the nuances while retaining the entire picture. While in visual art, if you're going to look
Disagree.
at the detail work, you
No
lose the
more
forest.
easier.
No more easier.
For
Nope.
anyone who has a differing subjective view.
Yeah. If you take a piece of artwork, you can take a look at it on the minuscule level.
On the macro and micro.
Yes, absolutely. There's no difference between the two.
And I refute that because I have studied, not studied, but I've seen and experienced a lot of visual art, and you can't, like, to truly appreciate it, even a tiny picture like the Mona Lisa, which is a tiny little painting, you cannot appreciate its entirety and its details
I disagree.
at the same time.
I disagree.
I'm sure you can.
I disagree.
really can't.
It's the same as if we're taking music. Let me finish. As we're taking apart music and we look at it on the micro level and we're picking each piece, but at the same time still listening to the whole. You either it's not. There's no difference of how well or not well you can pull it apart
This
and focus.
goes back to the subjective. Yes,
Yeah.
there will be some people, individually speaking,
Who
who may
can.
only take a work of art, a visual work of art, at a glance, and say, no, it doesn't please me as a whole, they walk on. Or there's other people who are just totally focused on the details and the texture work, and that is how they're going to judge the beneficial qualities of that particular art. That's the same exact thing with music. You
Just
focus
like
on the
just like
details,
your ears can
the
interpret.
chord, the note, the melody, or you're focusing on the work as a whole.
Just
what does
as-
it do for you
just
as an
as your-
album, as a song?
Just as your ears can interpret both pieces and the whole at the same time, by focusing on different parts at the same time, your eyes can do the same thing. They're a complex instrument that can both, and there are plenty of cases I can cite, where you can do both see the whole picture and then notice the smallest bush, the tiniest tree, a small person painted in the background, as well as see the entire picnic
That's
scene.
in fact where the word focus comes from.
Yes.
That's why we use visual focus, is what our eyes doing is we're adjusting perception. That's why we use focus to mean other things.
And there's focus with your ears as well.
Two things. One, Steve made my argument for me, specifically stating that people will view art differently. You were talking
What?
specifically.
What?
No, you specifically
Go back
said.
a second.
No, you specifically
That doesn't
said
make
that
your
someone.
point.
No, it actually did because you specifically said
I gotta
some
hear
people will pick out the detail work and cite that's why the detail work, that's why that piece is great because the details are amazing, and another person will say, well, it doesn't work for me as a whole. The whole composition.
Yeah, and if you
is
let me
terrible.
finish, I would have said there's others, probably more, who would do both.
Well,
Yeah.
Matt actually interrupted you. It wasn't me.
But I made that point.
But
That's
I
true.
made the point
that he
you
didn't.
finished my sentence.
Yeah.
it's actually been.
He's just gonna keep going.
No, it's our ocular system. The way we actually look at something, we cannot actually interpret our peripheral vision. Peripheral vision only looks for movement. So when you stare at a painting, unless you're actually truly far away where you can't see the details, you can't see the whole painting.
That's not true. Someone with a good eyesight can focus on the details from a distance and still see the picture as a whole. That's not in your peripheral. Your peripheral is here, not
No,
here.
your peripheral is actually
Here.
anything
It's a
outside
cone.
of
When
your
we go to
focus spot.
galleries, we don't view works of art on tunnel vision. That's
Yeah.
why they're usually done in big rooms
Your
and
peripher-
halls, so
your-
people can step back and take it all in.
And your peripheral argument is invalid because it's a cone. It's a cone, but the painting is within the line of sight. If the painting's within the line of sight, you can focus on everything and the individual at the same time. You can.
That's not scientifically true.
Yes, it is, because I'm not talking about the peripheral. The peripheral is
All right,
motion.
all right.
Peripheral is on the side, not in the center focus.
I'm coming back at you here and saying that this is a stupid argument of yours, because then again, that itself is directly comparable to music. If you're going to make that on a scientific scale, if you're going to go down to those terms, then okay, sure. When we're in the moment, when we're at the moment of a specific melody, looking at a specific chord, and we say, oh wow, that's really awesome. Okay, maybe at that moment you can't take the whole thing into account. you have to wait. You have to wait until it's done.
And that's the next part. Music is a form of art that has to be experienced through time.
Well, I'm not going to dispute that.
Visual art, while it can evolve over time, is experienced in the instant.
Sure.
Don't sure me on this.
Well, I'm not being
That's the
sarcastic.
that's
I'm
the
just
major
saying that is
difference between the two.
the most... That had nothing to do with your previous point, but I'm obviously
know.
going to admit that's correct.
Yeah.
And that allows for bigger interpretations. Because a song, instant by instant...
Expand on that.
A song,
Bigger interpretation.
That's what I'm trying to do.
All right.
A song, instant by instant, can change. A painting doesn't. Your view and your framework on a painting will evolve over time, just because you personally are in a different spot. But a song,
Well, that's why...
think of affection.
No, but affection as a whole, the complete song never changes. It's one song. That
It's
song
one
exists,
song.
but that song
Okay,
exists the
it-
same way a painting exists and doesn't change once it's fully created.
I don't even see why you should single out affection at this point. Why should you single out any song?
Yeah.
Any of it will occur over time.
It's a shorter instant of observation, but a song after the 2 minutes does not change. That's that song. It's the same song every time
That's
you hear
what I'm
it.
saying. It is one finished piece. Same is true for the painting. But a painting, you can see, and while you're looking at it, you can stare at it forever. And except for the ravages of time, it will not change. It won't. That painting will stay exactly as it is.
Correct.
Barring
It's-
entropy.
Correct.
Exactly.
Correct. Okay.
Music, as you're listening to music, and I've heard 15, 20, 30-minute songs, which are expansive to say the least. I've heard hour-long musical renditions. Instant by instant, it evolves.
Correct, but that's not the same thing. You're not making the same comparison.
No, I'm saying, but a
No,
painting
I
is a
understand.
complete work of art. A 5-second to 5-hour musical thing is one solid work of art.
Correct.
Because it exists through time, your experience of it actually has to exist through time. It is a different way of... It's a different form of art.
So
because
I
of
already
that
said at the
expression.
beginning that I agree with you here. Visual art, still life, or still non-life crafted, whatever have you, it does not take time into account.
Right.
Once it is completed, it is completed. The amount of time that is spent understanding it is that's dependent entirely upon the viewer. So no, I'm not going to sit here and argue that point. That's asinine.
I know. I don't know why he's arguing it.
I'm just arguing the way you're describing it.
Why? I got it right the first time.
Well, how do you mean, Matt?
So what I thought John was trying to say is that you take a painting, a complete work, and once it's completed, it doesn't change.
Yes.
Right, and a song, as a completed work, once you complete it, does not change.
But the initial viewing of it and subsequent viewings of it, that's the whole thing. Because it's 2.5 to 5 minutes of something that's going from point A to point B. It's a journey, not a destination. That's the biggest thing. A musical piece is a journey, and static art is a destination.
Yes, you're right.
And that's the big
But that's not how
difference.
you described it at first, and that's why I was confused.
That's what I was trying to get
Okay.
at, and I just came up with that
All right.
thing right there.
We're talking about the audience's ability to process it.
Exactly.
If that's the case, then yes, obviously music entails
Which is
time,
why it's
and
actually
visual
hard,
art
and I'm making-
is subjective.
I want that out there because it's hard to make comparisons between static and progressive, not progressive as in it's progressing,
Yeah.
but progressive changing art.
I will say this, and this is an abstract offshoot here. This is not. I'm not refuting the point, of course, but I will say that a lot of music out there can fool you into being more of a straightforward message than others. Say, just as you said before, the journey. So, journeys, prog music, classical music, they tend to move through so many sections. It really keeps you to the clock. You need to sit there and focus on it, beginning to end. You're not going to be able to kind of get the gist of it. You need to sit there and experience it front to back. There's other music, if you're on a strict verse-chorus structure, you can almost say that once you heard the first verse and the first chorus, you kind of get the gist of the song, provided it doesn't change too much after that. then you're only talking about 2 sections. You're talking about a much quicker manner of comprehension.
Yeah, I will concede that point.
All right.
But
yes, I'm not refuting the time.
That's the whole thing. There's no hour-long experience.
Yes.
Of
I'm saying
looking at a painting and it changing in front of your eyes.
I'm merely saying that
more than just your imagination.
music can play with your perceptions in that way.
Yes.
And this is why it's hard to. It's actually hard to make static and adaptive. We'll call it adaptive. Is that a good term? Art, like changing art, temporal art. I don't know.
Temporal.
What do you want to use it?
Kind of like a
static and temporal art. It's hard to make the comparison because one is a finished product from its first unveiling, and one you have to experience in order to finish.
But then let's go to movies, which does move through time. And there are artistic movies.
And this is a great point, and I was hoping you'd bring this one up because...
We finally got there, we got to the other...
Because while there's plenty of movies out there, from silent films to true, pure speaking dramatic pieces, movies and television and musicals...
Plays...
Well, no, musicals. What do they use? They use music.
Yes.
And since they're already using music, I mean, you're already working
they don't have
something
to,
right here.
They don't have to, though.
They don't
have to. And with the actual exception of silent films and true silent play work, they use sound. They're using multiple physical stimuli.
Yes, but well, of course, that's what we require today because that's the mainstream evolution of films. But if you're just going to look to their history, of course, it's really all about the motion of the visual.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is the natural evolution to the
and I think
the still life, as we were talking.
And I
before.
think the silent movies and the old plays and older movies speak more to being as versatile as music, just purely being visual.
That's right.
But any of the talkies being a composition...
But I'm not talking about those.
Well, no, I'm asking you, any of the talking films, ever since we were able to put sound synced with movies, with visual art, would they be more or less versatile because they're relying on more senses?
Well, that's an interesting question.
That is interesting, but to the same note, music can be visual, and we've talked about that. It's in the mind, but it can be very visceral and visual.
But that's not what I'm asking.
What are you asking?
I'm asking visual art using sound. Not sound evoking an imagination of something visual, but visual art using sound.
What about it?
Is that as broad as music, pure auditory art? Or is it hindered because there's auditory?
That itself is very subjective. I
Yes.
think we're going back to subjectivity all the time, which I think is going to be a recurring theme here.
Well, we're discussing art. We cannot be objective.
Of course, subjective is kind of the name of the game. At that point, I think because you're talking about a film, and because people accept that when they go to a movie, especially around the turn of that era, I don't think people were going there expecting to see like what was his name? A David Firth film. I don't think they were expecting to kind of have their mind blown. They were expecting a story. To them, the movie was the natural evolution of the play. The only difference was that it was refined. So I feel like you can't talk about movies without talking about the play at that point. So my answer is essentially not hindered, but it can't. The music cannot cloud it from the story. It needs to accentuate it.
So music accentuates it. That's what you're saying.
If done properly, that's what it should be doing.
Specifically,
yes.
like great examples are musicals. Great examples are like, say, the score from Star Wars.
No, musicals aren't accentuated by music. Musicals exist because of music. That's different. You cannot have a musical without music.
Yeah, you can.
How?
Shakespeare. Shakespeare.
Not a musical.
They're not musicals.
No. They're not musicals because there's no music, but Shakespeare has a very specific poetic prose in his dialogue.
But it's not a musical.
Which is the definition of singing. You can sing Shakespeare.
Right, if we're going to go down that route, we have a tendency, I guess, going back to antiquity, to phrase stories in a way that is sing-songy. Even if there's not instruments involved, or even if there's not actual singing, even if you're not following tones, there's rhythm. There's a rhythm to prose, to speech, that what by Shakespeare's time was very heavy on iambic pentameter. So that itself is a function. I think we're going back to functional here. It either is or isn't, but he himself didn't have to stay there. He didn't put everything in iambic pentameter, and certainly by the time we're getting to talkies, that's almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying there is a musical nature in his prose, in the prose of the time.
But I think at that point we're talking a musical nature, yes, a musical
It's
element.
not a musical.
At that point, we're talking about really more just the sound of someone's voice. That itself has an emotional connection.
In a repetitive melody.
It doesn't even have to be repetitive.
But it's in a melody form.
That doesn't make it a musical.
That's not what I'm claiming. You keep getting hung up on things I'm not saying.
This is the most roundabout.
You keep getting hung up.
But then it's because I don't understand what you're saying.
Because you keep interrupting me.
So what are you saying?
I'm saying that at its core, the idea of music, of the flowing of an auditory nature, is intrinsic to all of our visual coupled with auditory mediums. Plays, musicals, movies, television. Anytime they're speaking, and even silent films specifically had a backdrop of music playing.
All right.
To fit the progression. But there's always been an auditory...
On this abstract point, I'll accede. I will... Because it's auditory, and because music really is just patterns. It of any tone, and that could be language, it could be dialogue, it could be anything, then yes, in a very abstract sense, that is a form of music. Just watch how about an Oscar Wilde? Get off of Shakespeare for a second, because yes, alright, that's strict iambic pentameter. But how about an Oscar Wilde play, like The Importance of Being Earnest? That is beautiful language right there, and just the pacing of it, I would almost liken to music.
Sure.
That is an abstract sense.
But that wasn't even the point I was making.
That's the point I was trying to make.
Okay. But the reason I get confused, and I'm trying to make a point you're not, is because you also are trying to continue to prove a point that I have moved away from to make my own, just a different point.
Let me get to it, and then...
Let's just take this time to interject to the audience that this is a very broad spectrum topic that we tackled today, so hopefully we'll break some heads.
Okay. But that's what I was going for. Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
And the only point I was trying to make with
something.
musicals specifically was that you can't have a modern musical without music. The way modern musicals are created and performed could not work
That's
without
true.
music.
That is what he said,
That's all
and
I was
you
making.
spent time arguing the opposite way around.
You were not arguing my point. That's why I got annoyed.
non-musicals
Yeah.
had music, as opposed to musicals not having music.
Yes.
That's the time that you spent.
Well, musicals don't actually need instruments in order to be musical.
That's not what
music.
I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying modern musicals cannot exist
Let's-
Okay.
without music.
Well,
Let's do
then I'll
this.
make the claim that modern musicals are just more rigid form of standard plays. In the actual way people speak during plays, because they're going to be set towards musical tones, you can say the plays, it just won't nearly have the same impact.
Of course they're similar, but I'm just saying it's more, and I think Matt is saying too, it's a little bit more rigid, because it doesn't
Yes.
require the... it's
all.
not
So you're
abstract.
actually making my point that music is
Oh,
less rigid.
how does he
Then
do
you're-
this? How does he twist everything around?
Oh!
Yeah, it's my point.
Then
It's
you're
not,
saying
That's
musicals...
not your
It's not your point.
No, my point is that music itself is less rigid than these other forms. and that all these other forms are based upon music and are accelerated and
Well, if
accentuated.
we're just talking about...
and need
Oh,
music.
God, this
That's
is
the
such
whole
a
thing.
crock of crap.
They need music.
Let's do this by the numbers.
Temporal art needs music.
By the numbers. Let's rewind to musicals.
Okay.
We admit that in musicals, it is far more functional than a play.
Yes.
Because it doesn't just require dialogue and
Right.
scenes. It requires music and complete pieces. Not, that happened to be, that was a nice, meter to his dialogue right
No,
there.
it needs
it
more.
requires a song. It
Yes.
requires...
Whether it's a cappella or not, whether
Exactly.
it's instrumentation,
Right.
whether it's
It
even
requires
song,
something that
whether
big-
there's actually singing. It doesn't have to be singing.
But the reason I was making that point is because that's one thing. All the rest of it doesn't need music.
But he just made my point that it has music elements, that it actually needs music, or it needs musical elements.
Music-
But on that note, of course, there's a lot more visual there than there is auditory.
And silent films, while having music, the art is created without the music, and without the music even in mind. Those early silent films were just films. They added the music later to give it a flow, but it had nothing to do with the original art created. It was
Have you
created
heard
without it.
silent movies without the music?
Can I just extrapolate from this discussion for a second? Is your end result here, John, to say that music pervades every aspect of daily life? Or every aspect of art?
It pervades every aspect of what we're calling temporal art. Every single aspect.
Okay. And are you trying to say it does it anymore? Well, not temporal, but are you saying that it does... It, as an art form, pervades daily life and other art more than other art forms would pervade
I'm
daily
saying
art?
that the pure auditory experience of music is the foundation of all temporal art. Have you ever heard, and I'm pointing this out specifically, any of the old, truly epic, like Greek poems? Just read? Like the Iliad? I've heard renditions of this, not set to music, not set to anything. But
Iliad,
it is-
Odyssey,
it is
Oedipus Rex.
enrapturing, and there's no music except in his voice, in the voice of a person reading this. When read in a truly artistic manner, becomes music without being music.
I will say this, though. In that particular instant, that's more like color. Filler. Aesthetically pleasing decoration on top of the core component, which is ultimately the story. You could have beautiful language. It could be wonderfully phrased. You could fill it without how much iambic pentameter you'd like. If it's not a good story,
It won't work.
It will not work.
The Odyssey exists in your brain as well as it does
But,
read
In
aloud.
fact, sometimes I think that it's more the pacing of the story itself that we're really likening to music, a little bit more than the language.
Yeah.
And just because you might consider a story to, in some way, echo song, and sometimes it's done the opposite way around as well. That's why it's done the opposite way around.
Okay. And that brings us to the written word. As an art
I
form.
was waiting for that. Which is
First,
I
poetry.
feel is the
Poetry,
well.
Well, poetry is the
how much
precursor
of
to
an art-
music. More or
it's
less.
actually not the precursor.
Oh, it's
They
the
were
other way around?
If you go back to prehistoric times when we were first developing language, poetry probably came first. Probably. Like the first time we had
Probably.
language. But in all reality, we were probably making random rhythmic noises first.
Look,
So it's hard to tell.
let me just pull us back here because the three of us are not anthropologists.
No.
Exactly.
So-
That's the right one. He got the right word.
I did, yeah.
You did
I
one of
almost,
these.
I almost said anthropologists. In any case, for that reason, I don't think you're in the place to make that claim because it is quite possible
It's chicken or
that
the egg.
people
Yeah.
started banging on rocks before
First.
they started speaking.
That's
Yeah.
true. It's
It's
chicken-
possible that even happened many hundreds of thousands of years.
So let's
And
concede
there's
that
a possibility that both grew concurrently, that communication was musical in nature.
So why don't we concede that for now anyway, to us it could be a chicken or the egg kind of theory.
But poetry,
Yes.
poetry as you know it, will you deny the musical elements in it?
No.
No, of course
Okay.
not.
Then, okay, with that out of the way, because we don't have to make those points. Novels.
You're saying that novels have a
Look at the
musical.
written word of novels, of what would we consider true books?
Fiction?
Fiction, non-fiction.
There's a difference between the two.
I know,
But
that's
that's
why I'm
what-
saying both. And historical versus encyclopedic if you're going to do non-fiction.
Right.
Novels are certainly less tethered to that requirement.
Yeah.
Of the
poetry.
flowing of poetry.
That's right.
Yes.
But then we're getting back to the function quandary again. You can't just put a
I
series of
already
words
said
together.
that yes, the function is to tell a story.
Mhm.
Yes.
It needs to be an engaging story.
And it has, in every language, there's very specific rules in order to remain coherent. That words must follow each other in this way, not that way. Otherwise, it becomes unintelligible.
Yes, that's language.
Yes.
I'm going to go back to that. I'm going to use this time to swing back to that topic that you thought was just a stupid thing to bring up, a stupid argument.
What?
That if that's your criteria, the fact that you're either speaking a language or you're not, or you're either eating something that's palpable or you're not, or you're either hearing sounds or you're not, I still say that's completely comparable. You're talking about the basic form.
Okay. I want to touch on language and completely gloss over this argument because I think this is... I understand what Steve's trying to say, but I feel like the two of you are just miscommunicating. But I'm going to take it back...
No, this is off his earlier point that
I understand. I'm taking it back to language. Language, I feel, as an art form, because language is an art form. Accents are an art form as well. Language is an art, can tell a story without being understood.
No.
Yep.
No. Okay.
Yep.
What?
You consider
The
that...
minions
well,
from Despicable Me convey emotion and an idea without actually speaking a coherent or understandable language.
They're not using language.
still
You just said
it's
that
still
language-
a component of the story.
Yes.
No, but you're not using language. You just said that language doesn't have to make sense in order to convey a story. Then it's not language. Then it's just noise.
It's still a component of the story. In that case, I think you're holding too closely to language than story.
Well, no,
Story
I mean,
is really
that's
more
a visual
important than
medium
language.
that you have other areas to work with.
Yeah.
You have the actual look of what they're doing to understand what they're talking about. But if you translate that into written form, what are you going to be able to glean from it? What are you going to be able to
That's
tell
a fair
from it?
point. Yes, if you took the
Because-
gibberish from the minions and wrote it down, it wouldn't make any sense. Correct.
I mean,
Which is why I think we're just stressing a little bit too much on language right here. When you're talking about a novel, the refinement of telling a story in the written word front to back, it's the story itself is more important. And there's many of examples today from certain pieces of literature that people would, oh, great story, horrible author, great story though, and I still say that's a viable form of art.
Yes. But if it could be a great story, it still needs to be able to be understood.
Yes, it
Yes.
does need to be understood, but at that point, once you get to the point where it is understood, then how good the language is almost more of the icing on the cake than the story.
Then I'll say that music doesn't need to be understood in order to be good.
You're talking about, I think this is a segue into high art right here.
I'm saying specifically, music does not have to be understood fully or even partially in order to actually be good and moving. You can have no idea why you're crying. You just know that it moved you to tears.
I was even going to take that in a different direction and say, let's bring back Flying Lotus, because we love to do it. Maybe we didn't find emotional in it, but if it's a form of high art that for some reason we're missing, not that our points are any less valid, if I don't consider it to be, a form of high
Usable.
art, sure. But I accept that there could be an argument made to me to prove the contrary
Of course.
for that. So, you might not consider it as engaging or practical,
Yeah.
but,
Can we wrap back around to the main point? So your main point that you're trying to make
is that
overall,
music is more
versatile,
versatile
than other art forms,
and allows for deviance than other art forms. And I think I've been making that point kind of well in a couple of instances. What? You just agreed with me that music does not need to be understood in order to be enjoyed, in order to be
and
good.
The segue to that point was coming from novels.
But I'm making comparison.
I just said that it itself is versatile.
I'm going art style by art style. I'm making the comparison of how music is better than that art style.
Oh, well, we can't say better.
Well,
You're
how
saying
the music is more versatile
Stick with more
than
versatile.
that art style.
Okay, and that we just counterpointed that that's not necessarily true with the written word. Because language becomes less important if the story is conveyed.
No, that was the point of, if you can't understand it, you cannot read a novel. You cannot read a book.
Correct.
Music, if you don't understand it, you can still find it enjoyable. There's a level of subconscious understanding with auditory that you cannot get with written word.
I'm gonna say that with novelization, yes, it adheres to more rigid criteria.
Grammar.
But I think I disproved you on the visual art side of things.
Actually, no, wait. I have one for the
Oh,
written word.
specific-
I have one for the written word.
What?
Poetry. You can enjoy poetry and not get it.
It still needs to be words.
But you don't have to understand. You're specifically. I'm not talking about words. I'm saying you specifically said music. You can enjoy without understanding. That's your point, right?
Yes.
Poetry works the same way.
And poetry, we already discussed, has a musical beat to it. And
but
it's
it's
already
still
borrowing music in order to achieve its goal. That's the whole thing. Most of the visual arts of movies and television and plays borrow music to achieve its goal. It uses music or musical forms, auditory forms that we associate with music to achieve its goals. So it's actually using music to win. That's a claim I'm making. That
I
using
feel like that was the most stretch of a point you've ever made.
That's what the point I was trying to make. That poetry, that movies, that music, plays, use music and musical forms of speaking and being.
All right.
To
by the numbers here, the story either exists in a language or it doesn't. If it's gibberish and 18 consonants in a row, no, it's not telling a story. But music, yes, I do agree that you can probably place it in any form, in any abstract. You could completely remove yourself from music theory. You can remove yourself from the 12-tone system, and depending upon how it's arranged, rhythmically or otherwise, yes, it has more flexibility in that regard. But you did not prove the visual art side of things.
Okay, let me.
You never did.
Wait, no,
You've been glossing over that.
The two-dimensional.
Okay, let me say my point with the two-dimensional.
The static visual arts.
Both. Let me make my point.
Let me go.
I love art. I do. I love Van Gogh's one of my favorite artists. I also like a lot of modern art, like Picasso and a few others. Picasso, I don't get. Don't understand it. Doesn't make any sense to me. However, visually, it's still aesthetically pleasing, and I don't understand it at all. However, I still enjoy it.
Okay.
Just like music.
I can understand that, and I'll agree with that.
So you concede the point.
Here's one thing. No.
Okay.
No, I do not concede the point.
With 2D art?
No.
Okay, what's your counter argument?
Two-dimensional and three-dimensional static art is not passively enjoyed.
But I'm not talking about that argument.
Music can be passively enjoyed. That can be passively experienced. Static art can't be passively experienced. You have to pay attention.
That is so not true. People
Yeah.
adorn their apartments with art that they sometimes never look at. But you gain from your peripheral that it's there, and it attributes to the aesthetic of a room. I think
Absolutely.
that's as passive as it gets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because not all art is meant to be viewed in a gallery with intensive focus
Well,
on a
even
bench.
pieces on the wall. If it if you can... I don't understand. If you just throw it up on the wall and never pay attention to it and never look at it and don't even...
I just said
never.
You're peripheral. I said that if your peripheral gauges the art and attributes to the aesthetic of a room, which I'm sure it does, compared to if the walls were bare.
Then you're actually creating the art of the room by using the static art.
Yes, but I think it varies from art to art. I think it varies what art you choose to put on the wall.
Then you're not really using or experiencing the art as it was intended.
Music as well, though.
That's not necessarily true.
But the same argument can be made for music. If you're passively listening to something, you're not actually taking everything from that song that was intended to be heard. There's plenty of active music that's listened to passively.
I'm sure
that just washes over you.
I'm sure
like passive observance of
and
art.
Mozart really wanted their music to be listened intensively. I'm sure they wanted people to be sitting in the front rows, just completely focused on the performance. But let's face it, in the modern day, it tends to get used in Barnes & Noble, on the soundtrack. People use this stuff as really background passive music. As far as I'm concerned, that is 100% similar.
Decorating a Barnes & Noble's auditorially with Beethoven is the same as decorating your apartment with art.
I'll concede, yeah. No, that is a very good point. Using art as decoration, yeah.
Passively.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. No, I agree with you guys on this one.
Okay.
This still comes back to the whole problem of static versus temporal art. It's hard to make comparisons.
I still think that music and static art are similarly versatile. Whereas I will concede that the other temporal arts, which I hate that term, I just don't like it.
We gotta come up with a better term.
Anyway, but movies and plays and musicals versus music can be more versatile because those other things use and utilize music. I will concede that.
How about we just do it this way? I think there's 3 core things that we're working off here. And even so, really just 2 core things.
It is
and
2.
The third one is very manifested by us.
Yeah.
There's either auditory, visual, and then story. I think that's what it really all breaks down to, and every art form that we have borrows from those. I can't think for the life of me what's outside of that. I mean, except for the other sense that you could... I don't know a lot of art that's directly based, or at least not widely based, on pure touch.
Yeah.
Even that, I feel like it should have a visual component before you get
decorative art, like painting a room. Paints these days are actually created with a texture as well, so the wall feels a certain way, smooth, rough.
Pure texture.
So in that
sense,
sense, maybe
pieces like that. You know what? The touch tunnel. Remember the touch tunnel?
Liberty Science Center.
Science Center.
Yeah.
I would consider that a piece of art, and it's a pitch black, quiet. You're just crawling through. That is a pure touch piece.
It is very interesting.
Yeah.
Pitch black, quiet. That's exactly what I was looking for. Because
You're welcome.
I was sure that I wasn't like 100% on that. But
yeah, the touch tunnel.
Cool, right?
And it is a temporal form of art, considering how you experience it.
You have to go through it at a time. You can't experience all at once. It's a progression of time.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, this is just taking a turn for the better, this conversation.
I was reading something. They created a room that actually has a sound rating of -9 decibels.
I have read about this,
right?
I think they keep
have you read about this?
Minnesota or something.
Yeah, okay. Now, you close your eyes. You're blindfolded.
It's scary silence, apparently.
Listen to this. Close your eyes for hours.
Right.
You're blindfolded. People who are blind adjust.
Yeah, their other senses improve to help them manage.
But I don't mean you just can't see, but you're actually devoid of visual stimuli. You can still adjust.
Right.
These people who go into this room are so devoid of auditory stimuli, nobody's been able to stay in there longer than 45 minutes. It is that bad. You actually, at that point, become aware of your body's sounds. And that's something I really want to focus on. That auditory is an integral part of people, of the way we experience the world. And that's why I think, because it's such an integral part, I think it's the most adaptive. And with the exception of the static art, which is an argument I really don't know how to pursue, but anything that uses a visual component can't reach the full level that auditory can.
I mean, I've said on the base level, the very base level, and it's where our tagline came from, is that music is life and life is good. That came from the fact that growing up, life to me existed around music for me. Music has been there and gotten me through my life at every step because of how important it was to me. And so hence that's where the catchphrase came from. But the more I talk about visual art and visual stimuli and all this stuff, music is very much an integral part of human existence. Especially since, even as John was pointing out with this room, your body's sounds have a rhythm. Your heartbeat is a beat.
And we've been
and
so
has
much
been mimicked in music.
We've made the
And that
comparison.
there's a rhythm to life, the human body itself.
I feel like we're overlooking one thing here.
What?
You're telling me that people have a hard time adjusting because this room is...
The sensory deprivation of sound, yes.
Yes. What about the deaf? A lot of them get along fine.
Just like the blind, the deaf have nothing at that point to be denied. Once they actually lose their hearing, it's not even.
This room is more about
hear.
having the hearing removed suddenly when you're aware of it.
It's not even that. It's actually negative hearing. It's negative 9 decibels. Sound itself is damaged at that point. Think about that.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah,
I
but-
still think it's a little bit...
Yeah, I mean,
stretch.
to Steve's point, I mean,
That's not natural. I mean,
it's
Exactly.
unnatural.
But even being blindfolded and having no visual stimuli is not natural.
I suppose that's true. It's a tough one.
Yeah, but if you took someone who's been seeing their whole life and put them in a pitch black room where literally there is no light at all, they would probably get as disconcerted as that room.
There's a lot of people who are afraid
That's
of,
what it's
afraid
about.
of the dark.
I think it's more
There's also
about.
plenty of people who are afraid of loud noises or silence.
I think it's more to do with the sudden removal than the actual volume.
I've been in
Yeah.
pitch black. I mean, I've been in
For
legitimate...
longer than an hour? And not gotten weary or unnerved?
No. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Where? In what instance?
What's it called?
Well, I would like to know
Camping.
how widespread
It's not
this...
pitch black.
Actually, when it's an overcast night, it's pitch black.
No, it's not. There's still some minor amounts of light coming from the moon. Minor amounts.
No, I mean actually overcast pitch black camping. Like legitimate pitch black
There's
camping.
still lights coming from somewhere. You can still see something. It's not pitch black. The pitch.
You haven't been camping with me. Yes, I have.
All right,
Point
all
blank,
right,
I
all right.
have.
We're splitting hairs here, and I still say going back to the room, the decibel removal room. We're talking about. It was done on some. The test was done on some people. Are you sure that everyone would be
All
as disconcerted?
the people who have gone in have not been able to, and if I'm not mistaken, they make it open to the public at times.
See, but I'd be curious to see if you put a deaf person in that room, would it matter? I feel like it wouldn't.
Well, they're not going to be denied a sense they already don't have.
Right. So I feel like that room still has to do with the removal of from someone who's experienced it. A true test of it would
No,
be...
because a deaf person can't hear their own heartbeat. It's that aspect of actually the only thing you can hear is your heartbeat and your stomach gurgling and that sort of stuff. It's like the only thing you can hear is your internal noises, which is something people don't pay attention to, and that's one of the things that messes them up. Then the fact that when you yell, you actually sound like a whisper and things like that. Like, it's so creepy of sound being destroyed that people can't stay in there.
I just feel like most people, because even if you're saying you were in pitch black, overcast, you couldn't see anything, you're one person. I feel like the average, like with that room, if they were removed of all vision and pitch black could not see would freak out just the same. I don't think it's different.
I'm inclined to agree.
Yeah. Because even if you prove your point that you didn't get disconcerted and you were camping overnight and were fine with it, you're a person who also has experience, A, with camping, and B, with very specific situations. I feel like the average person going into these rooms, would be disconcerted after a half hour, 45 minutes, and couldn't take it either. Because they would feel like there was nothing. They were in nothing, and it would be just disconcerting. And until we have a test that proves that, it's kind of hearsay. There's no way to prove one way or the other.
It's true. Humanity has more experience with the dark than we do with the
Silence.
Silence.
The silence.
Which is true.
So
That's a good point.
that's evolution.
That's
Yeah.
a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was quite a big tangent.
Yes.
Yeah, but it was actually a very
No,
important,
it was interesting.
That's an important tangent to
That is
discuss.
because the big conclusion drawn there is exactly what I just said.
And I think that we've kind
Music
of...
does kind of pervade aspects of our, or sound itself
Yeah.
pervades aspects of our lives.
We're going to go active art versus static art instead of temporal. Active art is
Okay, I like active better.
art that actually exists over time, as opposed to art that exists momently.
I think that the overall arc of points here is...
This is the point.
I don't want to. Only if we can be clear about those definitions, because I still like using active as a antonym
active
to passive.
Yeah,
That's why
Active is
well,
focused.
then we're going back to temporal.
Until we get into the thing I want to...
We're missing a word here. We gotta be
I
missing.
know.
The point that music is hands down more versatile than all other art is proven wrong. It is. It's not true. It's not.
No, I don't see any proof in that. I didn't prove...
2D art. 2D art.
That's the whole thing. We have yet to really compare and contrast them.
We did.
No,
We did.
talked about all
We've done
sorts
it ad nauseum.
Yeah, we
No,
did.
we really didn't.
John, passive viewing.
Okay, fine.
What
Then
do you-
I'll make a point
What
as
do you
to
call
why.
that whole entire Barnes and Noble discussion?
Yeah,
'Cause I
where
thought
you
that was the most
conceded to
direct
us.
Wait, which
comparison
Barnes and Noble
possible.
discuss? Oh, wallpaper.
Wallpaper
Yes.
music versus wallpaper art.
Then I'll make this point that invisible light we're getting scientific here. Invisible light spectrum. There is only so much we can comprehend with our eyes.
The same can be said of our ears.
Actually, no. With frequencies and everything like that, it is broader. I mean, you can get infinitely...
you cannot say broader because
No.
the two are not. You can't compare them really, because you can't say broader to something that uses a completely different set of criteria.
Yeah.
Okay, broader's the wrong word. We can get infinitely specific with hues. Our eyes can't see those infinite hues.
Our ears also cannot hear an infinite amount of tones.
But that's
In
the whole
fact,
thing.
I would even say it's a little bit more limited in that regard, only because you could probably cram more particles into the space in front of you than you can cram waves, because at that point, waves are canceling out each other.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something that auditory art doesn't have, that visual art doesn't have.
Which is?
Timbre.
That's
I'm
because
looking at
that particular word is very specific to music.
Yeah. Timbre is...
The specific sound, not note, but sound something makes. The frequencies that it vibrates.
Yes.
And two completely different materials vibrating at the same frequency will sound differently.
On that particular, I would say that the comparison there is just material. Are you using paint, or are you using
Chalk.
Chalk? Are
Graphite.
you using graphite? All these things.
Yeah, it's the same idea.
Clay.
You can draw the
Well-
same picture. You can draw the same picture with different implements, and they're very different and come out very different. If you paint an image, draw an image,
But by using a different implement, you're not drawing the same picture.
and you're not making the same sound with those different timbres.
Exactly.
It's the same thing.
But now you're talking... Yeah, you're right. Different materials.
Material is visual's answer to
To timbre.
I didn't even see that one coming. That's
Yeah.
a great point.
Hence why I still say your argument.
I'm right up until static art.
So you can't say all art. And sculpture as well is the same material argument.
You can draw the Mona Lisa, but it happens. I mean, it's been
not the
done in
Mona
oil.
Lisa.
Yeah.
But
It's not the Mona Lisa.
you're still going to get the same gist.
Yes.
If you're going to get graphite
You can
representation
say-
on it.
But three-dimensional art, there is a subset that not requires, but relies on touch, and touch is actually a big thing when it comes to sculpture. That's, in my opinion, a little bit of a crutch for three-dimensional art.
You can get a sense of how something feels just by looking at it, though, without actually touching it.
I've seen things that look one way and feel very different, and are specifically designed around that.
But I don't understand then how... But that wouldn't giving it another subset make it more versatile? Because there are multiple factors?
But what if you don't get to touch it?
You can still enjoy it, and it can still be art.
An artist makes
be versatile.
this is more of a high art discussion. An artist makes a piece that's supposed to be visually and physically touched. And if you don't get to touch it, you're not experiencing it the way.
However...
It's like taking out the
You're
drums of a rock
specifically
song.
talking about art that's intended to be touched.
Yes,
Yeah.
and also, but
And
that
sculptures-
leads back to the not understanding but still enjoying. Like music, I could see a sculpture intended to be touched, and I personally don't understand it to its fullest capacity and intent, and still enjoy it. Which still makes it
Can you
plenty
repeat
versatile.
that? Just repeat
I'm
that one more
I'm
time.
a little bit
Okay.
lost on that.
So remember when we were talking about how with 2D art you could see something, not get it, and still understand it, much like music, making it very versatile? And one of our comparisons with a sculpture, if the sculpture is intended to be created to be touched as well as seen, and I only see it, I'm clearly not understanding it completely. However, aesthetically, I can still enjoy it, even though I don't get it. Because I'm still getting enough to enjoy it and enjoy it as art, even if I don't get it. And that's similar to music in the way where
All
if
right.
you hear it, you don't comprehend it,
I buy
but can
that.
still enjoy
and
it.
let's face it, that's kind of esoteric right there. The kind of sculpture that requires being touched.
Touch is a very specific example.
And I think for the exact reason of the point that Matt just made is because most people don't require that.
And on the whole, sculpture as a whole is not a touch medium. It's not.
Okay, well then I have something else that I just thought of, so it's not fully fleshed out, so give me a minute and try to walk me through it.
I feel like that's what we've been doing for
Starry
an hour.
Night.
Right, by Van Gogh.
How do you feel about it? Like, when you see it, what do you feel?
Me personally, I feel serene, beauty.
Okay. Related words. Have you stared at it and gone from serene to fearful? Have you seen a piece of art that as you look at it, you go, well, this is
I see what he's
beautiful
doing here.
love.
Yeah, so do I.
And this is love, and you go from love to hate, and to hate from fear to anger, and back to love.
Granted, I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
I see the point.
But that's only by virtue that it's not temporal. And I will
Yes.
say that people experience different emotions. That even if you don't go through a progression, people do look at art in different ways.
Looking at The Screamer, also by Van Gogh, right? Yes.
That's
one that the first time I saw it, I went through a wave of emotions. At first, I was completely afraid of it because I didn't understand it. And as I looked at the details, observed the beauty, I felt beauty, and then eventually a love for the piece. And a love in it, because that piece, he's screaming. Why is he screaming? Because he loves someone too much? Because he's afraid of something? Because he's arbitrary? Because he's erratic? You can go through a wave of emotions looking at that one piece
what we're
while
describing
it being
right
static.
now is enigmatic.
Yes.
And I think that those visual pieces would be enigmatic in the same way that a certain piece of music
Song.
may give off.
But we started from the beginning saying that art is looking to achieve emotions.
Yes.
An emotional response of some sort.
Yes.
And that's what two-dimensional, three-dimensional art does.
Yes.
Yeah. We can see this. Music does this as well.
Yes.
I'll tell you.
Those questions...
I have a point in a minute.
or something you thought about and thought about and thought about and eventually came to the conclusion of? Did you go in the viewing of it, just literally stand there and get that frame of thought?
Yes. And I know other people who have as well from artwork.
Okay, that's
because
weird.
it's not weird, because you're observing something and taking in the details over time within that moment.
That goes back to my forest and trees argument. You saw the forest, then you picked out the trees,
and then saw them both together in the end, much like a song.
Yeah, I see you being able to experience the
It
forest
wraps
and the trees of the
around.
song at the same time. While art, I don't feel like you can really.
Let me just
visual art, you can't do that.
Yes, you can.
John,
Okay.
here. Going off the pieces that I think are a little bit more concrete. Because yes, Matt used the point, and I think it was a point well taken, that there's a lot of art out there that is enigmatic or hard to distinguish and probably can give you a range of emotions. Let's talk about the kind that, objectively speaking, not granted, everything is subjective, but we can look at numbers here and say that yes, probably most people will feel a serene or a calm reaction to Starry Night, because
It's a beautiful restaurant scene.
yeah, and it's something that I feel culture has just kind of trained us to like over time. We kind of aspire to
Let him
that.
finish his point, John.
So, seeing as how that is probably geared toward one specific emotion, that's what that artist was trying to do. The vast majority of music out there tends to do the same thing.
Correct.
To the same degree. The vast majority will try to achieve one motion and do it really, really well. But the high art out there, the kind that's more concerned with your experience, there are visual artists as well as composers who
will take you through a range of emotions.
and that's their goal. That's
Yeah.
their goal as an artist. If they've done that, they succeed.
And it's on the same level of interpretation. I really, like I said, John, I'm willing to concede your point that with visual mediums and like very temporal mediums, that it relies on music very heavily, especially in a modern age, so music is more versatile because it's a part of it. But with visual, both 2D and 3D, more so 2D, but 2D and 3D, static art is as versatile as music. We've made too many counterpoints and equal examples and equal comparisons that are further proving that point. And as we dig deeper, we're finding more.
And I want to push us a little bit further forward here. Just go back to story. I'll push us further forward by going back. I'm begging you to eliminate the language criteria. Because I think if you
In
do...
music?
No, in story. Eliminate the language criteria for a second. Presume that to be a story, language is the prerequisite. Right? Once you assume that, then beyond that, I think you're going to find that it shares many of the same similarities.
Wait, I have no idea what you're saying.
The
What am I
same way that we've just been comparing visual art to music, in the way that one is really no more versatile than the other.
He's saying the same
I'm
for
saying
story.
the same for stories, provided you eliminate
language.
language.
By saying that language is a
Not
required...
eliminate, but
It's a
assume
required
it to-
prerequisite.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not a factor to be tampered because it's required to have that. It has to have
A story cannot exist without it. This
language,
is true.
yeah.
But once you have it there, it's still a very
Almost
versatile...
like music
there's-
can't exist without sound.
And I still refute that. Music can exist in silence.
That's if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it. Then
No. The use of silence. I think that's something you might be discrediting. The use of silence can be beautifully musically.
Yes, but it's not. There's no such thing as a 3 minutes of silence is not a song. It's not music.
But like saying there's no sound is like saying there's no story. The basic framework of musical art is that there's sound. The basic framework of a story is that there's a story. You're asking me to remove the actual
No, we're
framework
saying
of what
that
it
the
is.
basic
like
framework.
You just proved my point.
Yeah, we're saying no. Yes, John.
That's the
Hold on.
comparison.
Wait,
The
prereq.
prereq.
Like there's a prereq for music is sound.
That's what I'm saying. That is the only prerequisite in music.
The only prereq for a story is language. You need language for a story. So we're saying push that to the side. That's not a comparison. It's a direct comparison.
For written story.
For written word. For written story.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be written story.
That's what we're making. That's the point we're making. And therefore, if we don't make language as a...
This is why it's a miracle that you were able to actually remove me of this point.
No, written stories I've seen written stories as pure picture expression.
It's not a written story. We're talking books, novelization.
Pure drawn stories exist and have no written language and still do the same function as what language does with a written book.
Examples.
Growing up, you never had a picture book?
It still had language.
That's language.
No, I had picture books without language.
And we're talking about a few... I really wish, and I do want us to get into this later, we're going to talk more about the fusion of art forms, bringing them together as in movies and video games, but that's step one right there. That is language meets picture.
Yeah.
The picture accentuates the story.
Or about like a gallery edition of someone doing a photographic series. I've went to one of these ones.
Yes.
Where it's an actual story through pictures.
I figured you were going to go down this road. Yes, they may use a story through picture, but we are talking about novels here.
We're specifically talking about novels.
That is the art form, in which case you must assume language.
And in the photography...
Then you have to assume other things. You have to assume
of course
characters. That's not part of language. You have to assume characters. You have to assume setting. You have to assume, for a story, a plot.
And from there, I think that's where it gets very, very dicey. I think that's where authors bend the rules all the time.
Well, there's various interpretations of a plot, but for a story, you need a plot. For a story, you need...
And yet, the plot itself can be so abstract. And there's stories that begin at the end, and then they go back to the beginning, and they fill in the middle.
But it's still a plot. You still need a setting.
Right.
Stories have to have some sort of setting. Stories have to have a character. If the character is only an idea, it still has to have a character. Music only needs sound.
To be perfectly honest, I think that if it was sound without reason, without form, without pattern, I think it's not music anymore, I think it's sound.
I've heard music in the fall of a rainstorm. I mean, I've heard music without rhyme or reason.
No, because in a rainfall, if you're hearing it musically, there's still a rhythm. At the base, there's a rhythm.
There's no rhythm. I'm talking like, not rhythmic rain. Rain is not rhythmic. But the random dropping on my car windshield as I'm driving.
But when most of us refer to music as an art form, we're thinking of the art form. We're thinking of construction.
I've heard interpretive music like this.
So have I. I mean, this is...
But that's more on the high art end of it, though.
Yes. But that doesn't make it art. We're still using the word art here. And it's still music. I'm saying, like, a novel still has other criteria. A story has other criteria outside of the language basis. Music has one criteria, and that is audible.
Doesn't story itself encompass those things?
Well, that's what I mean.
Doesn't the word story, isn't that just an overarching term for things that include plot, however abstract it is, setting, however abstract it is? In that case, isn't the prereq story?
Is there any aspect of music besides audible that is a prerequisite?
Sound.
Besides sound. You just equated language to sound.
Things that fall under sound?
Like, no, is there anything
I just said,
melody?
I just said
is melody necessary for music?
Not on the whole, although anything we might perceive... There's a very wide range of things we might perceive as melody.
But is there, does music... If we're saying music is used with sound...
I see
Stories
exactly
are used with language.
Exactly what you're doing. I feel it's... I really feel you're splitting hairs.
No, I'm not splitting hairs. I'm saying because it does not have these rules to follow... like a story, even as broad as the rules are.
It simply doesn't have subsections.
Exactly.
That's it? That's your entire argument, is the fact that sound itself is broad.
Is pure interpretation. A novel needs to have certain things. A story needs to have certain things. Actually needs. Music doesn't need anything besides sound. And a story doesn't even need language, but it does need
But then on that note,
much more refinement in order to be considered what it is.
But then wouldn't you say that plot is just about as... That's a term that we kind of invented for something that has some sense of organization, which is almost like the way in which we perceive melody. It seems to be in the forefront. It seems to be stated linearly. Therefore, I think I'm going to give it a name and call it melody.
Okay, but you just said music doesn't need melody.
That's my point. Is it's perception. It's the way in which we look at the story from an outsider's perspective, and just say, "All right, that one thing. This seems to be plot," but I feel like if a plot was lacking, and it was just people going about their routines, I don't feel that's really plot anymore. And I think stories have been done, like still life pieces or day in the life, stream of consciousness, memoirs, things of this sort. At that point, like, would you perceive what you're doing right now as a plot?
To some extent, yes.
To some extent.
Yes.
Probably to the same extent that I might vaguely hear a melody in the way in which rain was pattering on my windshield. Or at least I'm going to hear rhythm. Melody might be a stretch, but I'm going to hear rhythm. Just as you might hear...
I think you're stretching in this case.
I don't think
I
so.
don't think so. Rain is percussive by nature, impacting on something, therefore creating a rhythm. Rhythm is, at its basis level, a series of impact, a series of points, punctuations.
Yeah.
In a specific order.
No, it's not. Rhythm doesn't have to be a specific order.
Did you hear what we just listened to?
Yeah, there was
Earlier,
no specific
intelligent
order.
We're
design
listening
music?
to
Yeah.
intelligent dance music, which is a
Intelligent
genre that
dance
I just
music.
discovered existed. And let's put it this way: for the average dancer, it's going to be really tricky.
You might
You're
break your
probably,
neck.
and you're probably not going to be able to predict what's happening next because the rhythm was changing up constantly. That does not make it not rhythm.
Yep. And to the same extent, plot, if not fitting into that perfect structure, can still be considered a vague plot, just like rain can be considered a vague rhythm.
I think you guys are stretching here a little bit more than I've
How
been.
about when authors break the fourth wall? Isn't that absence of plot for at least a period of time?
Actually, it's a different kind of plot.
Just
That's
as
why we
I
call
just
it-
described that when a rhythm changes, it's a different kind of
rhythm.
This
I
is
don't,
not a
But
stretch.
I don't know. I don't see the rhythm that you're speaking of. What is rhythm? Define rhythm for me as you're seeing it here.
A series of percussions.
Yeah,
Just a series of percussions.
Percussions.
With no metronomic nature.
percussion, a perception of pattern,
Yes.
even if it changes up on a dime.
Yes.
Okay, then I've heard stuff that actually has no pattern.
Yeah, well, it can still be rhythm without a
Musically.
pattern.
No, without rhythm. Without any even perception of pattern.
So you're saying that there's music that exists without
Yeah,
rhythm?
it was really weird stuff. It was high art. I didn't really enjoy it, but it had no pattern. I really went through this stuff. This was like...
But then you're looking at other
This is
elements
college.
here. Let's say ambient music. Ambient music is almost entirely tones. Ambient music is probably not everyone's idea of a great listen. Can set the stage, though. It can provide you with a mood. You might say that that's fairly absent of rhythm, but even if it's absent of rhythm, it probably has other things. So, and I would argue that going back to literature, you may lack defined characters, you may lack... there's any number of things. And I really think if I just were to go into the annals of the real abstract authors out there, I think you'd be surprised at what has been written and what people could still consider literature,
And a
they'd
story.
still buy it.
I'll say this in I've probably read in the neighborhood of 5,000 books, without really exaggerating. Every single one
Proves
of...
nothing.
No, but I mean, and across huge levels of genre, from the benign, generic to the esoteric,
To the abstract.
To the abstract.
What was the most abstract work that you think you've read?
Oh... Outside of poetry? Poetry is probably the most abstract.
Let's stay on poetry for a second.
You want to talk abstract? Haiku.
Because poetry certainly lacks a plot.
Yes. Sort of.
No, actually,
I'd
there's...
even say haikus have a plot. And haiku would probably be one of the easily definable most abstract.
And that's where I think
of
you're
poetry.
stretching to say it has a plot.
Defining plot in that sense?
Good, true, old school Japanese poetry?
We're not talking about good or true. We're just talking about it.
Then it's not quality art. It failed at what it was doing.
And that music that has no rhythm was not quality music either.
Yeah.
Actually,
that's...
I've enjoyed some of it.
Enjoying
Not really
quality
good.
art the same.
If it makes me if it evokes enjoyment, it's invoking something.
That doesn't mean it's quality. It doesn't.
But if it's invoking something, that could be I'd say that's probably the definition of quality. If it's actually doing the job of what it's supposed to do, which is invoke, then it's art.
So, then Kesha is art.
Low art, but yes.
Okay, so then by that same thing, the haikus that invoke something that aren't technically good are still quality.
No, they're low art, just like I said, Kesha.
Okay. Therefore,
Yes.
still further proving that language and music are parallel.
Wait,
Or
what?
story and music are
Story
parallel.
and music.
Story and music are parallel. They both have low of the low that ignore certain functions.
But no. I don't see what you're getting at here.
The point we're trying to make is that language...
But we were not making that point.
Yes,
that's
we-
No, that's not the point you were on. I never refuted that point.
What, that story...
It's still...
That story, as an art form, can be as versatile as music because you can remove an aspect and it still works.
No!
But
You didn't make that point!
With the haikus that lack plot.
It failed. Just like Kesha fails at being art, it's low art. It's failing at what it's supposed to achieve. It's still a try.
Okay, but that's putting music and story at the same thing, that they have low forms that don't exist without specific things missing, even if they're enjoyed by someone.
But they're failures. That's what I'm saying. They're not doing the job properly of art.
Okay.
What they're supposed to be doing. They're not achieving said art.
Same could be said of these rhythmless tracks that you're talking about. Even if you enjoy it, it's low art because it's not
that's
good.
the argument I'm saying. That's still including them, and I'm saying in written word, you can't have that lack of plot, that lack of setting. In literature, you can't have that. There has to be those definable
I'm going to
criteria.
concede one thing before we move on. The interesting thing about this topic here is that you're saying that stories require plot, they require a character, they require a setting. Without them, you might have no story or low story.
In
low
that
art.
case,
No,
true
I'm-
low... No, not low. It would not be a story.
And are you trying to say that in the instance of music lacking rhythm, which I still say is kind of a stretch for any music to lack rhythm,
Yeah,
or
very specific like anything else.
lack a semblance of melody or tonal structure, because really, even patter on the windshield has these things. That could very well be low art as well.
Low art, not the lack
Or high
of being art. It could be low art, it could be high art. That's for persons
That's
to
for the
judge.
masses to decide.
That's for
yes.
persons to judge. But I consider it art, while literature without a plot of even an incoherent, random, mutable plot, even a poorly defined abstract setting and a poorly
I
defined...
thought of a book that doesn't have a plot that's still regarded as art.
Hang on, abstract character. What plot? What book?
As far as I'm told by the people who have read it, and I could be wrong because I haven't read it, so you'll correct me, the Silmarillion is an encyclopedic collection of what Middle-earth is. It's not a story.
No, it's a series of short stories.
Is it?
Yes.
So it's not just essentially facts and compilations of Middle-earth.
It's
They're definable...
biblically written, biblically stylized book.
So in the Silmarillion, there are definable plot points and characters.
From the very beginning. There are named characters from the very beginning. It starts with the creation of the universe by the highest of gods. It is a group of short stories.
Okay.
That flow together to create the mythos of Tolkien. It isn't, a plotless thing. There is an overarching story throughout the thing.
Okay.
I've read that book 12 times. I love it.
Okay, so you proved me wrong. I was going based on what I heard about the Silmarillion, so that's fine. So then whoever told me that didn't know what the hell they were talking about.
You know what? The only thing... I haven't read anything, and I've read a lot of stuff, and of all forms of art, really literature is in fact my favorite. Even more so than music, and music is just shy of a close second, but literature is my favorite form of art. I haven't come across something that was both coherent and lacked either a plot, a character, and a setting. I haven't found something. I would love to read something that actually lacked that aspect.
Let's just rewind here.
Okay.
Because again, plot, character, and setting are all components of the story. In which case, story itself.
But literature doesn't need a story. Literature can be storyless.
Then you're going back to proving my point there.
It can still be...
You remove the story, just as in music, you could remove the rhythm, or you could remove the melody, or you could remove the tonal qualities.
I mean, considering all
separately,
the subgenre...
either two of them or one, you at least have to have one component.
And I mean, look at
I think that's the same exact thing here. You could remove the...
At that point...
characters.
At that point, if literature doesn't have a story, it's no longer art.
That's not true.
That's
Incorrect.
Very
and I will prove you wrong right now. Literature has dozens and dozens, and I'm not even an avid reader, dozens and dozens of subgenres, different things. Let me finish. When discussing literature, the term literature or books in general, first of all, you're going to say that the beautiful construction and the visuals in a travel log or a cookbook, are those considered not literature? They're considered something else?
This is going back to the function argument then. It has to fulfill said function. They do it artistically, but in that case, literature is pure functional first, artistic second.
Well,
and isn't that comparable to the vaguely tonal music that doesn't have much organization to it?
Or function.
Well,
but it
not
just
the
isn't
function.
art.
The function of a cookbook, as you just said, obviously it's the function of a cookbook. No one's going to argue that. But the function of that music is probably for music therapy, as you said earlier.
As opposed to being musical.
In which case, music, as we understand it as an art form, is kind of tethered to being patterned, to being organized. Below that, you're dealing with functional music that's more organized sound, or sound that even has disorganized. It's still functional.
And
but the point is when it becomes music, that point is organization.
And also, bringing it back around, we were talking about how visual mediums rely on music to get it to its next level. Music takes so much from story. It does. In some of its versions, some songs are storytelling songs, and without those stories, couldn't exist.
The specific songs, but music can exist without stories.
And we just said literature can exist without stories as well.
But then it becomes a functional thing.
And same with some of those songs.
Well, then we're going to okay, because we're just getting really circular again, and we're just going to keep getting circular. Let's wrap it up. And I want to say something.
All right.
The conclusion here, whether we actually agree with it or not, seems to be that the three highest forms of art, which it's safe to say the static art, music, and literature, are essentially equal.
They're fairly versatile.
Because the thing is, when you're talking about what borrows from something, it's all a chicken and the egg situation.
Oh, yeah.
If there were more chickens and more eggs, and I mean, it's. I don't think. I mean, I do think that we can accept a certain work, no matter what art form it's done in. I do think we can accept it purely in its in the manner in which it was originally done in. But that doesn't mean that perception-wise, we don't try to bring other things into account.
Right.
When we look at a visual work, we do try to kind of put ourselves in that position. We try to put ourselves in the setting or whatever is being painted. Or we try to, if we're looking at something that's really abstract, it doesn't appear to have any setting at all, we're trying to make a story around it, or we're trying to gauge an idea from it.
Or see the view of what it's supposed to represent.
And to some point, it's probably the reverse synesthesia. Well, it's just synesthesia at that point. Mixing senses, you may in fact hear something as well.
I think that this wrap-up can safely say, though, that those three main nails are hit with the same hammer.
Yeah. And I will say that I don't find any other, because they're super genres. That's what they really are. Those three things, static art is a super genre, because there's performance art that could be considered static art. Architecture is a static art.
It doesn't change.
Food, to some extent, is both static and temporal.
Because it's created over time, yet...
Literature is the catch-all phrase for poetry, which you can point out certain aspects of poetry that make it lesser, while you can point out certain aspects that make it greater. I mean, literature is the big one. Music, well, I really consider music to be the foundation of all television, movie experiences. That's just my personal opinion, and I think it's a fairly decent argument.
I think it's safer to say that music, movies and TV specifically, in a modern age, aren't as versatile without music. The music helps make them even more versatile, and it leads into that remix culture and the mixing of genres and just mixing in general.
And I hate to play devil's advocate here at the wrap-up, but I'm not even entirely convinced of that. The modern film... Even so, even while Hollywood sees it that way, of course, the modern IFC films, for instance, or any independent film, just because they don't get the same ratings that the big blockbusters do, does not devalue them.
No, but I know
a lot of them do not use music.
And a lot of them do.
Most of them do.
But it does not devalue the ones that don't.
Actually, yeah. I'll point to a specific film that people listening do not watch, which would have been enhanced by music. This film, it would have.
Which?
Rubber.
There was music in Rubber. You're wrong.
No, there was tonal music. But
right. I'm not even indulging this conversation. The reasons why you shouldn't watch Rubber are not because it lacks music. All right.
I just had to bring up that independent film.
All right, fine. But trust me, there's plenty of other films out there where the lack of music during an emotional scene is stunning. It's the silence of pure, unadulterated reality staring you in the face. Because most of us go through our lives without having a soundtrack going through our heads. I mean, if you happen to keep your headphones on constantly, well, sure, that's fine. That's you, John.
I have an internal soundtrack.
But the thing is, that's just not the way
it
is.
But those movies, are they completely devoid of music the entire movie, or just in specific scenes?
Many of them are devoid the entire way through.
I've seen stuff like that.
And it's refreshing sometimes.
Honestly,
as much as they love doing a music podcast here and talking about music on end,
wait.
Sometimes the lack of it, silence is
I would say
key.
that I haven't seen one of those indie films that I thought would probably be better as a book. That's what I think most of them are, because honestly, without the actual auditory stimuli, it suffers as a movie.
I disagree. That may be a pure taste thing, but I think that
I think that the point that John was trying to make more
Before you rudely interrupted me, thank you very
He
much.
didn't
Stephen.
rudely interrupt you.
Hey, well, he
Shove
just-
it.
That was a point that had to be made, and before we were going to just start accepting music as an integral part of modern
No, but
movies,
that's not what
I
I'm
had to say
saying.
it.
I
Oh,
misphrased
Just
it.
saying.
I misaphrased it. I'm saying that literature, music, and 2D static art and 3D static art are just still more versatile than TV and movies. I'm not saying that TV and movies aren't versatile at all, because of course they are. I'm saying that those three powerhouses are more versatile
Are more than other art.
than the other performance, because a lot of those, not all of them, but a lot of them use other things or have more variables.
They have...
I just don't think that they're
crutches.
on the same
Or they
versatility as those three.
They're the core components. I'll accept that much.
Okay. I mean, I think that's at heart what we're saying, is that literature, music, and visual 2D static
And I have...
compose those other
This
temporal
is
arts.
why film buffs really have a blast just going on and on and on about well, the thing is, there's more to look at because you have to take into account, the quality of the visuals, the quality of the music,
Yeah.
where it fits with the dialogue. I mean, they're just such complex productions, and this is why often one person can never be credited for their work on a film. Like, you could praise the director from dusk till dawn. Trust me, it's not just him.
Of course.
And
I think
he
that
probably
lends more
shouldn't
to
have as
than
much credit as he does.
maybe this discussion gives us a tier. The three main forms of art are simply the ones that are most versatile. Literature, static 2D visual art. So
Just call
literature,
it static art.
static art, literature, and music are the powerhouses, the top of the tree, and then everything else, the other forms of art, come from those three in one shape or form. That's why they're the most versatile, not because they're better or different or whatever. They're the branches. They're the tree that the branches come from.
Excuse me.
I think
What we
that's
see,
the best
what
wrap
we see,
up.
what we hear,
And
and the human experience.
Yes, I think that's really
That's actually the best way to describe it.
yeah.
The seeing, hearing, and imagination.
Yep.
The crux between the two.
And interactions, of course.
Yes,
That's
and I think
half of what life is.
And I think that's a great.
Well, no, that's the whole thing. These forms are actually devoid of interaction. In their purest, most...
No, they can be very personal. That's
Yeah.
well,
Personal.
No, interaction. I was talking
No
about. I was
physical.
talking about story,
Okay.
particularly.
Well, there's no physical interaction. That's the whole thing. There's no physical action in a book. Interaction. You turn the page. That's the physical interaction.
I mean, a character, just interacting with another character.
Oh, okay, okay.
That's how I meant it.
Well, there's no physical interaction with music besides the vibrations on your eardrums. There's no visual interaction with a painting except the light hitting your eyes.
Right, and that's not how I meant it.
Okay. Because you're talking about the emotional interaction.
I was on story at that moment.
Okay.
Just for clear.
So,
So in closing, I think it's safe to say that again, we have these three main that make the rest, and that's why, and we'll eventually get into this kind of overlap and these merging of arts. It comes from those three main things, and that's why some of the best works are those merges in specific cases, because they utilize the merging so well.
And it's also why a lot of things fail, I think.
Also, for the same reason.
Because it starts to focus more on the cohesion or this future of art, and starts to neglect those core components sometimes.
Yeah.
It just takes it for granted. Like, it's a soundtrack. Who's going to care about a soundtrack?
Right.
It matters.
yeah, that's why sometimes it's the I guess we'll say the pure arts. Can we call them the pure arts? Is that appropriate in this case? Or the legacy arts? As in what came before?
Are we that pompous? We're going to be pure Socratic here?
No.
These are all the pure arts.
The
and from
specific-
here
I don't
on,
think- the high arts?
we shall refer
I
to
don't
these.
want to use any of those terms. I just want to
Okay,
say
I want to stop repeating though.
the
Music,
base,
literature, and
the most basic forms of
the
art.
basic arts.
The basic arts are story or literature,
The elemental arts.
And static, yes.
Gotta
Okay.
get pompous.
The elemental, the
You
stat,
can say it
the-
without sounding pompous.
The basic arts. The basic arts.
I
Are
think,
the
I
ones-
think they're actually called the liberal arts.
Shh. The basic arts are the ones that actually have endured the longest.
well, until we evolve a new sense. Who knows? If we become telepathic, a few million years down the road, we might have a
new form of
sixth
art.
sense art.
Maybe.
Well, there is actually a sixth sense. It's the sense of balance that everybody does have.
Anyway,
And people-
I'm not even touching that.
It's
I'm
kinda-
just moving on.
It's kind of proven.
According to this one article that I read.
No, it's also been almost proven that people can always know when they're being looked at.
I have seen this study.
Yeah. There's probably more than five senses.
I don't buy it 100%, and if you look at those results...
Well, the five senses are concrete. The six, 7, 8, 9, 10,
yeah.
whatever.
If you look at those
They
results,
ain't concrete
they
yet.
could be fudged.
Yeah.
It could be coincidence.
So, on that
It's
note,
Heisenberg style and principle right there.
moving along.
And that's Vanu.
No, well then I don't know where I am.
Anyway,
This is temporal art gone wrong right
yes,
now.
yes. This podcast is an example of temporal art gone wrong. Moving forward, Steve, do you have a spam email for
I'm
us?
still laughing.
Yeah, I know.
do indeed.
The look on your face.
Good, I'm glad to amuse you.
Our spam mail. Water is the most important and the heaviest part of the pack. How much water you should carry depends on how much water is available where you're hiking. In the desert, you'll want to take more water than you think you'll need. But if you're hiking near mountain streams, you can get by with carrying very little extra water. Regardless of how much water you choose to carry, you should often depends on how much water you'll reach during the day. But generally, each container should be at least 24 ounces. When you reach fresh water, drink all of the water you have with you and refill both containers. Continue to hike as your water filtration system works. When the water is ready, stop and drink again. Always drink all of the filtered water that you have left when you reach your next stop. This method should keep you well hydrated throughout your hike. And Oakley polarized titanium crosshair sunglasses. Like Oakley's.
I don't understand why spam bots post about things that have nothing to do with where they're being posted.
What's worse, that is actually bad advice.
Yeah, also, you shouldn't chug all your water when you find a new water source. That's asinine.
No, you get oversaturation and you actually lose nutrients fairly quickly, which is going to hurt your ability to hike.
They always say sips throughout the day.
So in
Yes,
closing,
not chug.
don't listen to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Folkley,
In
that's
case,
wrong.
Yeah, don't listen to a sunglasses company about how your hydration system works.
And also something I want to do before we get to next week's album, which is Steve's choice. On air, I want to thank both of you for doing this podcast with me for a year.
Oh,
You're welcome. On multiple layers.
I think that this podcast has become a firm and sturdy function in all of our lives, and we look forward to doing it every week, and I enjoy that.
Well,
And I will continue to do it until that goes away.
I concur.
You're the drive, Matt. You are the drive here because you're the one who loves this.
You're the marketer, and you found all of our guests and given us any semblance of credibility.
And Steve's the brains. Steve is the one.
I know music.
No, he's the one that we always look to when we need definitions, when we need to try to understand this on a more technical level.
Yeah.
I can't do it. Matt can't do it. But we've learned from Steve, so now we can do it. In some instances. And I don't know what I am.
You're the bibliophile. You tackle these things in terms of story.
Yeah. You find function.
I guess
That's perfect.
Yeah, you find function.
I'm more about aesthetic, and you're more about function.
I think I look more towards the art of things.
It just hasn't seemed to be the case. You're mostly
Actually, no, you're right. I
more
guess you're
functional.
right. I'll point out iambic pentameter and how it relates
Yeah.
to mathematics.
There you go.
It's ironic that I tend to use technicality
To explain the art.
explain the abstract.
And I use emotions to explain the
Technical.
physics.
The physics.
Very interesting.
Learn something new every
So,
week.
Well, I am smart.
Heh.
I know I keep saying that. And everybody looks at me funny and laughs and then walks away.
So, Steve,
and then I bust out the metaphors.
why don't you tell us what we're tackling next week?
All right, next week, our first prog album, which I am so excited for.
Is it pure prog?
Nah.
What is it?
Well, this is the thing. This is one of those things that kind of crosses over, and I personally might call it a new animal.
Oh, great.
But it borrows from prog, borrows a little from metal.
I'm like angry with you now.
I know.
Oh, great.
So
I'm
now
telling you, keep your ears open because this one's well, I won't say anything yet. We'll do it next week.
So the important part is, what is it and by who?
Godsticks is the band. That's one word. Godsticks. They're from England. I don't know much about their history except that they've had a couple of albums previously, and this seems to be their.
You'll
their
find
breakthrough.
out more about that and
This
bring it
album
next week.
is the Envisage
The
Conundrum.
Envisage Conundrum.
Yes.
Okay.
What?
We say visage a lot. We usually don't say envisage, but
The Envisage Conundrum by Godsticks.
envisage is bringing something to fruition or in your mind.
Well, that should
Visually.
be interesting, if nothing else.
Yes.
My nose is already bleeding.
In closing,
It's a good
I
summer
want to
for that
thank
one, too.
also the fan. Yes, you. However many of you who listen.
Mike.
We appreciate you guys listening. We appreciate you guys checking out the website, and we'd be nothing and not doing it, if there wasn't some kind of reception on the other end.
We might.
Keep checking out our Facebook page, the website. Email us questions, comments, especially on this lengthy topic. If there's anything you want to throw out at us to bring up next week, please do. Thank you. I love doing this every week, and I continue to. And in closing,
And as always,
music is life, and life is good.